I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is 7:04, the Board of Selectmen meeting for Wednesday, June 7th, 2017, and this is being recorded. Are we also live? Okay, and we are also live, so I thank you everybody for attending. This is both a Board of Selectmen meeting, but the primary goal for this evening is to discuss the Regional Communications Center. I'd like to introduce the individuals who are here, but also just sort of establish some ground rules so everybody understands how we're going to proceed, but to make sure we also proceed in a very efficient and effective manner to get the best out of the meeting this evening. When people come up or they want to speak, we're going to have people come up to the podium. Please make sure, even if you've sorry, the mic. Thank you. There was a podium a few minutes ago. Please make sure that you introduce yourself, even if you've already come up, again, because this is a live meeting. We're going to have a presentation first. Then there may be questions that the board up here may have, and then we will open it up to the audience for questions. And we would just ask that people be patient. If multiple people want to speak, just stand in line. We'll try to get to people in order, one at a time. I'd like to introduce, actually, before we start, stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to introduce some of the individuals who are here to speak tonight. We have Frank Posniak, who is the Executive Director for the State 911 Department. We have Robert Silva, who is the Chief of Police for Cohasset. We have the Fire Chief for Cohasset. I have them reversed. And Robert Sellon, who is the Police Chief for Mansfield. Jim Duggan, who is the Town Manager in Dracut, is here. We have Beverly Woods, who is the Executive Director of NMCOG. James Donovan, who is the Deputy Director of NMCOG. We have both of our chiefs here tonight, David Scott, the police chief, Toby Tyrell, the fire chief, David Stairs, our communication director. We have several members from the finance committee, including John Ladick, the chair, and Mark Bassapoli. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark and then to Frank to be able to do their presentation. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Frank Posniak. I'm the Executive Director of the State 911 Department. And I just want to introduce once again to my left Fire Chief Rob Sylvia from Cohasset. He's also on the State 911 Commission, and he's the Vice Chair, actually. And I asked him to come today because he's been involved in a project down in the South Shore Regional Emergency Communications Center, which consists of the towns of Cohasset, Hall, Hingham, and Norwell. And he's been involved in that project since 2012. It's actually an existing regional center at this point, and I thought he would be a good one to come here tonight to give his view and perspective on our regional facility. And I also asked Police Chief Ron Sellon from Mansfield to come. He's involved in a project with the towns of Mansfield, Norton, Easton, and Foxborough. This project is in the early stages, but he's a big supporter of regionalization and what's going on in that area. And both of these regional projects are governed by a district agreement where each of the towns in that setting have an equal voice in setting the protocols and policy. And that would be a similar situation with the project that Pepperell would be joining as well. So that's a key distinction to keep in mind as we proceed in this meeting. Just a little bit about the State 911 Department. I'm not going to bore everybody with what we do because we're here to talk about regionalization. But our charge by statute is we administer and coordinate the 911 system in the state. We provide all the call processing equipment to all the PSAPs across the Commonwealth. We provide training. We run an extensive grant program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit because that's where the funding comes from for regionalization, is through a couple of grants that we run. And I also mentioned each time I do a presentation, we also run an equipment distribution program and by that we provide specialized telephone equipment to our disabled community, and we're authorized to do that by statute. Chapter 223 of the Acts of 2008, and I'm not going to, get into a lot of legislative talk, but that really revamped our statute quite a bit back in 2008. And one of the features of that legislation was, and that was back in the Patrick administration, was to put together a program to incent regionalization. And again, our program is all incentive-based. It isn't a stick approach, it's an incentive approach. And it authorized us to develop and implement a grant program to incent regionalization. So in that statute, there's a few grants that I'll mention. And first of all, there's a support grant. And the support grant, the amount of money that is allocated to each of the PSAPs across the Commonwealth, and a PSAP is a public safety answering point. So that's probably, hopefully, the only acronym I'll use today, but it's basically a 911 center. The allocation and the support grant for each of the PSAPs in the Commonwealth, and there's 240 of them at this time. So each PSAP gets a certain amount of money through the support grant. But if you're a regional PSAP, you get more money through the incentive grant. So it's additional money that would go to a regional PSAP to run their operations. And in addition, we have what's called a development grant. And the development grant is to assist projects such as Chief Sellon's, and in the past and still currently the South Shore Rec that Chief Sylvia is involved in, to provide them funding for equipment, construction, architectural engineering services, and whatever else is needed, like project management and professional services, to get a project up and running. So currently what we have in the Commonwealth is 240 PSAPs, as I mentioned. When we started this program back in 2008, we had 267. So through this program, we have been able to reduce the number of PSAPs by 27. We have 25 regional centers at this point. When we began the program, we had 11, and those 11 served roughly 80, 87, 85 communities. The 25 that we have now serve close to 140 communities. The reason behind putting together this regionalization program was at the time when we started, we had 267 public safety answering points, or PSAPs, and that's quite a few for a state of our size. We're third or fourth biggest as far as PSAPs goes across the country. California and Texas have more than we do, but then of course they have 6 or 7 times the population that we do. So there was a movement to reduce the number, and the reason behind that is just the efficiencies that you could achieve through regionalization, through having dedicated staffing, a better ability to handle major incidents, the ability to do emergency medical dispatch, and also handle wireless 911 calls. And with respect to that, the wireless 911 calls, except for Boston, Nantucket, and now the Duxbury Regional Center, all wireless calls are routed through one of 4 wireless PSAPs, 3 run by the state police and 1 by the Essex County Sheriff, and then transferred to the local PSAPs. But that call that gets transferred in is only 1 call, whereas the state police and Essex County Sheriff, for one incident, could be taking 10, 15 calls. So we're putting together a movement to try to get all the regionals and even the primaries, PSAPs, to take those wireless calls. And if you know, in a regional setting, you would have the resources to handle those calls better than in a smaller setting. So that's one reason, or one of the reasons why a regional setting, given the resources that you would have, that ability to handle those calls. In addition, there's an ability in a regional setting because it's, to promote within their dedicated staff. There's increased staffing for field operations. We have right now, out of the 240 911 centers that we have, 36 of them still have sworn officers handling 911 calls. And in a regional setting, it's a civilian setting. It allows those officers and fire department personnel to be out on the street. And also in a regional setting, there's increased coordination of a region's limited emergency response resources. So there's just a few of the reasons why we're trying to promote this program that is set forth in the statute. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a support grant, and right now, PEPRO in fiscal year 18 coming up, the allocation would be $27,764. Now, in an incentive with the support and incentive grant, the projection for a PEPRO, Drake and Tewksbury regional project is much more than that. And that's because of the incentive grant part of it is kicking in more money, more funding to do the day-to-day operations of the regional PSAP. The development grant I mentioned, right now, for the last 2 years, fiscal years 16 and 17, the project has been awarded close to $2.2 million. And that was primarily for architectural and engineering services and the construction of the new building. In this year round, fiscal year 18, I think they have put in for over $5 million, with 1.8 of that to cover the other half of the construction, and there's also some equipment money in there as well. The bottom line of it all is that to get the project up and running, these grants will be funding virtually every penny of that amount to get it up and running. And there would be no expense borne by any of those communities for basically state-of-the-art facility and state-of-the-art equipment. A couple of things I just want to mention too, because I usually get these questions when talk about the grant program, because there's this perception, and I guess because of other grants, reality, that they go away. I can't give you 100% certainty that these grant programs would go away, but I can give it pretty close to that. I mean, in order for it to happen, the legislature would have to amend the statute, and the governor would have to sign on to that. And like I said, we've been running this grant program since 2009. We're in our, fiscal year 18. We're running it again. So I don't see it going away. It's a stream of money that's available. Basically, it's local aid, and it's to promote a program that not only a regionalization program that was supported by Governor Patrick, but it's supported by Governor Baker as well. And being on the inside and with this program and with this current administration, I feel that they're even more in tune and encouraging this program than the previous administration. So I just can't see or envision at this point this grant program going away. So like I said, there's 240 PSAPs at this point. This year we expect at least maybe 3 or 4 more PSAP closings, and in the next couple of years, potentially another 10 to 13. So there is interest in doing this throughout the Commonwealth. Not all of them come to fruition, but I gave you the numbers, and there has been movement, and I think over the coming years there will continue to be a movement in different communities, wanting to participate in the program, given the benefits that they would receive from it. Just a couple last things before I turn it over to Chief Sylvia. I was reading over the citizens petition, and and there was an issue about distance. Generally, the distance is not an impediment to regionalization. There is a mapping component that is very good, and actually with the next-gen equipment, which has been put in, the next-generation 911 equipment, because we're putting in new equipment throughout the whole Commonwealth. It's called next-generation 911. The mapping component is excellent, and every PSAP that I go to, there's indication how good that mapping equipment is. It's just like the first thing they mention. And just looking at some of the regional PSAPs that we have across the Commonwealth, we have quite a few of them that are a distance of communities that are being served by a regional PSAP that are a distance apart from where the public safety answering point is located. For instance, down on the Cape, the Barnstable County Sheriff, which is located in Bourne, answers 911 calls for 7 communities down in the Cape, and one of them is Wellfleet. That's 51 miles away. And, they do an excellent job in handling the 911 calls for Wellfleet. So while it is a concern, it's not an impediment to regionalization. And the other thing I'll mention, too, because I saw it, too, is the issue with a smaller community joining a large community. And what we have right now, Worcester, which is the second largest city in the Commonwealth, Leicester joined them. So they're in a regional setting. And Lynn, I think Lynn is probably in the top 5 or 6 as far as population in the Commonwealth. Swampscott has been with them for a number of years. So, it's not an impediment. It can happen. And so I just wanted to make those couple of points as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Sylvia to talk a little bit about the SHREC.
Good evening again. My name is Robert Sylvia. I'm the fire chief in the town of Cohasset. And as Frank mentioned, I've been involved with the creation of the South Shore Regional Emergency Communications Center, commonly known as the SHREC, and we haven't been sued yet, so we'll just leave it there. And I was, as I said, on the ground floor of this with the early development grants, and we funded the entire build-out of the center, including, we had a building, so we didn't have to worry about putting up brick and mortar. We had space in the Hingham Town Hall at the time, and we spent that first 2 or 3 years about $3 million of state 911 money to build out the center. After we got through with that, we started to tackle the technology issues, because what we discovered was that some of these things that you worry about, dispatchers not having local knowledge of a certain community being one of those, were able to be tackled through the technology. We, since then, I'm not going to bore you with all the numbers, but we are just shy of $8 million in development grant money that we have put toward the center. We have a continuous self-healing, self-contained fiber loop that can take, that actually connects all 8 agencies, so 4 police departments, 4 fire departments, to the SHREC. We have radio systems. Every one of the departments, all 8 departments, the radio systems were upgraded so that there was no problem in that regard, and redundancy was added. We have microwave systems on top of the systems that are looped through the through the fiber. So they've supported us, State 911, obviously, with a lot of the technology that we needed. We are in the process of replacing our computer-aided dispatch system. We are also in the process of taking our own wireless direct calls, which for me as a fire chief that runs an ambulance service is one of the biggest game changers that there is. Very simply, right now, 72%, I think was the number that I was told last week, of all 911 calls are now coming in via mobile phones, via cellular networks. More and more people are eliminating their hardwired phone lines. So obviously, what's the problem with the wireless direct, or before wireless direct, was it went to a state police call center. They had, by statute, a minute to a minute and a half to handle that call before they forwarded it to wherever it was going to go to be dispatched. You can see that there's a huge delay in getting response to a call. With Wireless Direct, we're going to capture all of our own wireless calls right to our center and eliminate that delay. So, when minutes matter, this is a huge change. The last thing I would mention real quick, and again, I'll be here as long as you need me to be to answer questions tonight on my experience, but the incentive grant. When Frank mentions the fact that your incentive grant money goes up, that first year of 2012, we did the math real quick, and I think between the four communities, we were receiving somewhere in the range of about $130,000 in incentive money. This year, we received over $650,000 in incentive money. That went directly to offset our budget. So obviously, that is a huge help for us as far as maintaining costs and containing costs between the four communities. And that last piece that I will mention, that Frank also mentioned, was the center is overseen by a board of directors. The board of directors is the four town managers for the four communities. They have an equal opportunity to speak their piece and vote as they choose. And they control the budget. So they control how much each one of us ends up paying, because we have a formula so everybody pays a fair share based on population and call volume, and it works out pretty well. And below that, we have structured everything below it to a point where the four fire chiefs and the four fire departments actually have their own committee that oversees all operations of the fire departments. And wherever possible, what we've been able to do is to standardize practices where possible. Now, I'm the smallest community of the four. Hingham is almost 3 times my size. So obviously, I can't do things like they do, but the dispatchers within the center understand that. And they've been able to create a situation where they know my department well enough that all the little one-offs that are special to me are handled, and they're handled seamlessly. I can't speak more highly for the professional staff that we have at the SHREC. And I would mention that before I went over there, I had a single dispatcher trying to answer phones and dispatch police and fire all at the same time. Now, during the day, there's a minimum of 5 people in that room. So when you have those surges of calls, there are additional staff that can handle them. We've been very lucky in that regard, and the only time that we drop down at all is after midnight. And after midnight, again, this is all based on the call volume as projected out, and everybody argued about it. We have 3 and sometimes 4 people on the floor. So we don't see that as a problem. A lot of the things that we've done, I'll be very honest about it, we ran into a lot of bumps in the road because we were one of the first. But we've learned, we've grown. We have a center that we're very, very proud of, and I know it's a long way from here, but I would invite anybody that wants to come down to contact me or to contact the center. We can arrange for any type of visits or anything along that line. And, through your board, through your administrator, through Mr. Posniak, I'm available for questions even after tonight if anything comes up. And obviously through your fire chief, because I checked with him before I came up here and made sure that he knew I was coming.
So Chief Salon from the Maysfield Police Department, and I'll talk about exactly what it is that we've been through as far as why we came to the decision that we did with regards to the REC. I do not have the benefit of years of experience having gone through this process already like Chief Sylvia has. However, what we did have is the benefit of being able to conduct an autopsy of exactly what Hingham did right, what Hingham did wrong, along with the Rutland REC and the other RECs. And he is absolutely correct in the graciousness of going up there, and they will give you a complete tour of the facility as well as a complete bio of where they hit their bumps in the road and where they should have done certain things a little bit better. But having all that in hindsight and having the ability to understand that, we take a look at it and go, okay, how do we increase operational efficiency? And for the Mansfield Foxborough, Norton, and Easton group that we belong to, we took a look at what we were doing, and the fact is that on any given point, I had 2 people in a room. Other departments had basically the same situation. And in the event of a mass casualty incident or a large-scale regional response, we all agreed that none of us were capable of handling that type of call volume should it occur at any particular time. The other aspect to it that was significant for us was increasing response times. And the fire chief and I, about 4 years ago, began taking a look at our response times to certain areas of the community and started tracking exactly how do we get to certain areas of the community in a quicker and more efficient manner. One of the matters that Chief Sylvia just spoke about was the fact that is the call time and the length that transfers take. As of right now, if you call 911, and this is the issue that we had, if you call 911 and you get state police barracks on your cell phone, what you're going to get is a transfer from there to a local agency, and then from there maybe another local agency. And just as a matter of personal experience, I had my 2-year-old had an accident in a local city that we had nearby shortly after, in 2013, shortly after I took over. And that call went from the cell phone to the state police, from the state police to the local police department, from the local police department to the local fire department, where the local fire department finally dispatched. And it was a total of well over 10 minutes before our help actually ended up getting dispatched and sent to us. And from a matter of delivery of resources and delivery of emergency services, anybody that has spent any amount of time in this industry knows that minutes equal lives. And the number of times that we can cut down transfers is going to cut down response time, which is effectively one of the major reasons why we ended up going in this direction. One of the other major things, too, that we said from the very beginning, and actually our project was probably, and I may or may not get in trouble for saying this, our project was probably a little bit different than most because of the fact that it was driven primarily by the police and the fire chiefs. The 4 police and fire, the 4 police chiefs, the 4 fire chiefs all got together, and we took a look at the way that we do business and decided that this is the direction that we want to go in. And there were 2 basic tenets that we pushed as a theme throughout the process over and over again. And for anybody that is looking to, and Pepperell needs to make a decision as to what Pepperell needs to do, and it needs to be based off of Pepperell's needs. But I will say that no matter what gets done, the basic tenets of local control and accountability need to be a running theme through everything that gets done. And we hammered those 2 themes significantly in consistency throughout this process because of the fact that where you see some of these projects, and this is just from our experience of reviewing multiple projects, and where they have sort of gone sideways and where they have succeeded, those that have succeeded primarily because of the fact that there was a theme of local control and accountability that went down to the local level, and basically the communities retained a vested interest in being able to have a voice, just like Chief Sylvia stated. They're having a voice in the operation and how it is run and how certain operational procedures are done. One of the other major benefits that we had with regards to this, too, was the fact that we created a subcommittee on a standardization of the operational manual for all dispatching services, and we standardized our dispatching practices through all 4 communities. And what we found was that through that vetting process, we also got our best practices as far as what we liked, what we didn't like, and then obviously, like anything else, it's a work in progress. I don't have the benefit of being far enough into the program to be able to say with any certainty whether or not our grant increases are going to occur, unless, of course, Mr. Posniak wants to tell me that right now. No, I didn't. I wish the only thing I was missing is a sun lamp to put over in front. But besides that point, it has been a cooperative, collaborative effort between all 8 police and fire chiefs and the 4 town managers. There has been, I could say that the 4 communities, we work closely together already. All 4 abut each other already. As far as that goes, and that was the reason why we actually began this process with a 5th community, the city of Attleboro, but then there was a difference between the city of Attleboro and whether or not Easton would stay in. One wouldn't stay in if the other would, and eventually it was decided that Easton was going to be the community that ended up staying in. But as Chief Sylvia said, if anybody has any questions, I can only speak to what we've gone through and why we made the decisions that we made and how it's good for the town of Mansfield. But if anybody has any questions, I'll be here. Thank you.
So I'm just going to open it up to the board for some questions. I have a few, and then I'm just going to go on down the line, rolling into Lisa, and then we'll open it up to the public. Some of the concerns that people have expressed, right now we have mutual aid agreements in place with towns that are contiguous to us, but would not be contiguous in part of our regional center. And there is concern that the mutual aid wouldn't be able to stay in place. What has your experience been with that?
Most of our mutual aid is done through the county level, so we always did our mutual aid through Plymouth County. And of course, for me, Plymouth County Control sits all the way down in Plymouth, which is 25 miles from where I am, 25, 30 miles. What we found was that when we went to the regional center, that the regional center handles a lot of our mutual aid calls before they have to go out to the county and then go out and back, and everything is handled in-house. But that really spoke to the technology piece, and the technology piece is what drives that. So when the boots on the ground say that, in our use our vernacular, we need a second alarm, and on that second alarm, X, Y, and Z is supposed to roll, that's all in the computer systems, and the folks that are there, either through the use of technology in-house by toning out a station or toning out personnel, they handle it that way, or by contacting the regional center and asking the regional center to handle it for them. But we have had zero problem with anything along that line, and in fact, we found some efficiencies that we never had before because the 4 communities were being dispatched out of that same building. And the operational awareness that creates. All the dispatchers that are dispatching those 8 agencies all know what everybody else is up to because there's big screens on the wall that show where everybody is and what everybody's doing at that time. So we had zero problems as far as that went.
In terms of your equipment, I think there are some people who have concerns that our equipment won't be local. I assume that your equipment is still local, your trucks, your cars, your personnel, that in essence it's the call that's going to your regional communication center, but your staff are still local outside of that call.
That is correct, yes.
I think Chief Salon alluded to this a little bit, but I'm going to ask whoever wants to speak to it on a little bit more of a specific basis, the benefits of a one vote versus having someone else control for a town in this circumstance.
I can just speak to the fact that the 4 town managers collaborate every year on the budget, on the overall budget. And obviously they're very attuned to cost. It's about cost containment as much as anything else. So what it's done is, yes, they all have a vote, but I will be very honest that the vast majority of things that come up for a vote are unanimous, because very simply that they have gone through this and beaten it to death before they even bring it to a vote. So having the voice involved and being able to speak your piece because you are a member of the board, that's always worked. And it's worked not only with the board of directors, but it's also worked with the operations boards, and either with the police operations or fire operations, or in fact, we sit on a regular basis because we meet monthly, where the board of directors will hold their board meeting, but every single entity involved is there, from the director of the center to all of the fire chiefs and all of the police chiefs, and that's where a lot of the business gets done on a month-to-month basis. But I think if you were to contact the town managers, I think that's where they would speak to having control over the operation of the center, is because they are involved in it in a day-to-day basis in some cases, and they handle everything, as I said, from the budgets to the contract negotiations. So it's They have control.
Chief Solon, in terms of, since you're going through this process now, in terms of setting policies and procedures, were they set by the state, or did you, as the regional communities, get to set your own policies and procedures, things that worked for you as a team?
That's effectively the way that we handle it. Is what we did is that the 8 police and fire chiefs, we set up a subcommittee, an operational subcommittee of one member from each agency, both police and fire, and they basically went through that process, and it was a very painstaking process, and it was a lot of work. And if we can save anybody any amount of time or headache, if you want a copy of it, as far as agencies go, we're more than happy to share it, and then you can try and then you can just improve on it. It's by no means a complete and perfect document at this stage, but it was governed and directed primarily by a lot of our internal policies, whether they be through accreditation or state certification, through pre-existing statutes and things of that nature, as well as best practices through either fire or police service. But that was primarily, it was directed through us. It wasn't directed by state so much as it was influenced by various other components, if that makes sense.
It does. And then, Chief Silva, I have one final question, and then I'll open it up to Roland. Since you're an existing agency already and you have a number of towns spread out geographically, how have you handled the technological hiccups, if you will, because of weather or technological downfalls, anything like that that may have impacted maybe 1 or 2 towns but not other towns? How has that worked so there's no disruption in terms of the call process?
Obviously, we sit on the coast. Norwell would tell you that they also do, but they sit on the river. But 3 of us sit on the coast, and Hull being a peninsula that sticks out into the ocean, we get beat up on a regular basis by all nor'easters. So that was one of the things that we looked at as we designed our systems, was how do we build redundancy in so that those hiccups don't happen. And that's where I mentioned that we have the fiber loop that was paid for through a development grant. We have the radio systems with microwave links that were paid for via the development grant system through the state. And right down to, as I said, we're going to put in a new computer-aided CAD system, and the CAD system obviously is cellular-based, but we now have mobile data terminals in all the vehicles that, again, were paid for through the development grant. So what we did was we built some redundancy into all of the systems so that if there was those cases, especially during big storms, blizzards, whatever the case may be, we felt that we've answered a lot of those things in advance. And the center itself was hardened with generators and battery backups and everything else so that we don't, the goal is not to lose any communication. And so far, knock on wood, so far so good.
And, sorry, just to dovetail onto that, what if the failure is at the that's very loud, at the regional center level itself? Is there any backup center that would handle from there?
Well, through the 911 system, there's an automatic fail-safe that if our calls cannot be answered there, they can be picked up by it's actually the town of Weymouth that would pick up our calls, our actual 911 calls. But as far as dispatch, we've maintained multiple points within. I still have the ability to transmit everything out of my building, but that was my decision, and it's no more than the antennas that I've always had. So I can handle the town of Cohasset from my station if I need to, as far as the fire department goes. I think the police have, they pretty much have a redundant system that way so that they can pick up on their stuff if they need to. I will tell you that at one point we lost power in the 4 communities for the better part of 4 days. And the center stayed up and running, but we started losing our external systems. We started losing radio systems because battery backups at the actual sites started to fail. So we went back, identified a problem, and went back, and since then we've hardened those systems also. So it's more a case of learning as you go along, and as the chief mentioned, we've run into a few hurdles, and I think at this point, we fixed the majority of them. Again, very proud of the staff over there that they handle the grant requests for us. They do an amazing job in that regard, and that's my executive director, Maureen Shirkus, who I'll give her a pat on the back publicly. So we're at this point, we've seen a few of those little hiccups, and we've found ways to try and get them hardened to a point where we don't have to worry about them anymore. So it's really about the technology and how do you do this. And it was a combination of not only state 911 but Homeland Security grants that we tapped into to fix the radio systems. So it worked out pretty well.
I just have one point I want to make on the redundancy, as the chief mentioned. All the PSAPs, public safety answering points across the Commonwealth, do have an alternate in case they go down. The calls would be routed to the alternate. But in putting in the next generation 911 system, we identified some of the larger regional PSAPs and also some of the larger primary PSAPs. And the primary PSAP just answers the cost for the municipality that they're located in. We're putting satellite dishes on those identified regionals and primaries in an effort to keep the calls at that regional or primary. So that's another feature that I want to mention with the next generation 911 system that we don't have currently.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank Director Bosniak and Chief Silva and Chief Salon for coming out here tonight to enlighten and educate us on this whole process. It's kind of nice to hear, you've got Chief Silva who's actually gone through this process and is further on down the road, where Chief Salon is just a little bit ahead of where we are. He's got quite a few projects on his plate as it is. My first question actually goes to the director, and we've looked at going into a complete build-up with a regional system versus looking at an existing system that's already in place. And given that, what do you see as the pros and cons for us to go into existing versus going into a new build-out?
Well, I think with an existing regional to join it, the time frame may be a little sooner than with a new building. That's not necessarily true all the time. I mean, the existing building would have to be able to accommodate and take you in without any kind of expansion or new construction to expand the facility. So I think time-wise, I mean, it could be a little sooner than with a new building, because you build a new building and it generally takes a couple years to get the building constructed and equipped. So that's what I see as probably the major difference.
What about in the funding aspect of that? So if you've got a center that's already up and running, they've already purchased all their equipment, and so somebody joining that, would they receive the same level of funding as going into a brand new system?
Yeah, I mean, even the existing facility, when they bring a new community in, they have to look at their CAD system and also their radio system and see what kind of upgrades and infrastructure would have to be made. And usually you just don't move in. The easy part about moving anybody in is routing the 911 call. That's the easy part. But the computer-aided dispatch systems, if they have it, the radio systems, that's what has to be analyzed, and that's where usually the project management service or some professional engineer comes in and looks at it and determines what is needed to get that done. So there is that cost that you would incur or we would incur in moving a community into an existing. That doesn't go away.
So the state would still fund most of that equipment upgrades for both the town, for us as a town, as well as the center for whatever they needed.
It would be through the development grant, but the existing regional center would have to apply for it.
Okay. Chief Silver, I was glad to hear all about the redundancy and the hardening of centers, because I think that's one of the things as a citizen or anybody who uses the service, we'd like to know that we pick up the phone and dial it, that it's going to be operating. And so I was glad to hear that answered one of my questions relative to backup. I like the concept of having a local backup in case of a catastrophe so that you could still do something locally when everything else is, in that case, that'd be a major catastrophe is going on. And looking through my notes, I think you've answered, between Melissa's questions and your presentation, you've answered most of my questions. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lisa at this point.
Hi.
Here, use this one.
Thank you. Hi. My question is, I have a really big concern with our town being so much smaller than the other two towns that we're regionalizing with. What is the guarantee that you're going to get the response time that you do from our people that we have now? As far as Tewksbury and Drake, it isn't going to know exactly, like, second house on the right, Mrs. So-and-so's house. How can you account for that service and how much time it's going to lag between response time that we have now and response time that we'll have with another town?
That was one of our biggest concerns when we first started. There was, because of course we took 4 communities, put them into one room, and we brought all of our legacy dispatchers. Our concern was just that, local knowledge. And how did we address that? We addressed it through the technology piece, because technology, and as Frank has mentioned about the next-gen stuff, the automatic mapping of calls. So the calls pop up on the screen so they know exactly where they are, because even if you have your legacy dispatchers, they may not recognize, when somebody says it's, it's Sunset Rock. But the map is the map. So you attack that through technology more than anything else. And at this point, 5 years into this, or 4.5 years into this, a lot of our legacy dispatchers have either retired or have moved on, and we have people that don't live in any one of the 4 communities that are doing our call taking and our dispatching services. And I have to be honest, it's seamless. And the reason I say that is these folks have chosen this as a career. This is a career path for most of them, and because they've gone to a regional center, they have chances for advancement. They're not just a dispatcher at this point or a call taker. They get a chance to move up and become a supervisor, and at some point, just as we have in the fire service, they become the director, a.k.a. the chief of the department. So it was something that we were concerned about, but I think we attacked it from that standpoint, and the technology piece continues to improve through the next-gen stuff, and again, through our latest generation of our CAD system, which hopefully will go online at the end of the summer, where everything will be up on those mobile data terminals in the cars and in the trucks so that everything is there. So hopefully that's how it gets addressed, but it was a concern, and it was something that we managed to work through.
Okay. My next question is, you said that if each town administrator or town manager had the input into what goes on with the regionalizing or the regional center, what do town administrators know about what goes on with stuff that the firefighters and the police chiefs are experts at?
That is a very good question. The bottom line is that the board of directors handles money. The board of directors does not have anything to do with operational issues. So that's why there is a separate operations committee for both fire and for police. They handle the operational stuff. We go back to the board of directors when we need things, which cost money. I mean, it sounds somewhat like your police chief and fire chief coming to the board of selectmen, right? When we need things, we come to you and we try and convince you that it's a good idea. That's how it really works for us. The town managers are more worried about how it's funded, and the Day-to-day operations are up to the operations committees, and that's pretty much how it works. And we have, again, we have a phenomenal director who we deal with on a daily basis whenever there's an issue. And I will tell you that when we first started, and I think the chief alluded to the fact that they got to dissect us. When we first started, we started every meeting by the chairman of the board of directors asking point blank, so what are the complaints? And we would spend the next hour or two going over all the things that people were concerned about. Now when he opens up a meeting and asks that, all you hear is crickets. Because it's at this point, we handle these things on a daily basis. It doesn't get to a monthly meeting. It doesn't get to the board as far as operational issues. Those things are taken care of as needed by the individual departments, the center, and if need be, by the operations committee.
And who determines who the operations committee is?
The operations committee, just like the board of directors, is one rep from each one of the agencies. It is the same. So there are 4 fire chiefs on the fire operations committee. There are 4 police chiefs on the police operations committee. And when we have to sit together, the 8 of us sit together to talk about global issues.
But are they chiefs within those towns?
Mm-hmm.
They are?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before I open it up to the group, which I will do next, just so that everybody understands, the agreement that we have has these same operational committees. There is a fire committee, there is a police committee, and there's even a subcommittee on technology that runs with those committees as well, which would be comprised of the police chiefs and fire chiefs from each town, and then Dave Stairs is our communication director. So I'm going to open it up. If anyone has a question, just please come up to the microphone, identify yourself for the group.
Bill Durno, 9 Chestnut Street. Your technology you were just talking about. I have one of those in my car. They call it a GPS. If you don't keep it up to par, it'll lead you nowhere. That's my joke for the evening. So you were saying it comes up on a screen, and you got it all tuned into all the towns. But these small towns are adding streets and adding houses. You keep it up to date?
I'll let the director talk about the next-gen equipment.
Yeah, we do. We have a contract with MassGIS, who does all our mapping work and updating addresses. So they've been under contract for us for a few years now, probably 4 or 5 years, and they are charged with keeping those addresses up to date. So that's who does it for us, and they are up to date.
They don't work for GPS, do they?
No, GIS, I said.
Good evening, Jason Russell, Low Road. Just have a couple questions. I think I studied more for this than I did any exam in high school, so I think it's Chief Sloan. Is that correct? Yes. Just had a question. You said that your towns, the 4 towns you got together, you had the 4 chiefs and the 4 fire chiefs, 4 fire chiefs, 4 police chiefs got together and approached your boards. Now, if it was the other way around and your boards went to your chiefs and you guys didn't want to do it, how would you guys feel about that decision? If you said, no, it's not a good idea, and the town just went with it, how would you feel about that? Honestly, because this open forum is what we should have had before our town voted, so we're just trying to get some opinion on this.
Well, again, like I said earlier, I could talk about Mansfield and how it worked in Mansfield. Leave it at that.
I can actually field that question because that's how it happened. The 4 town managers at the time sat down and they were trying to figure out ways to save money. And one of the things was regional efforts. So they came to a discussion of why can't we regionalize the dispatch services between all 8 agencies. And that was before they invited the fire chiefs and the police chiefs. So the fire chiefs and the police chiefs get in the room, and that is part of the reason why it took about 18 months for us to sign our intermunicipal agreement. Because net, as everything went down, their concerns were more about cost, and our concerns were about safety and efficiencies. And finally, at a meeting, a comment came up, and the comment was very simply, what if we can provide a much better service for the same amount of money? Would that be okay? And the 4 town managers at that point, the light bulb went off, and they said, you know, we can live with that. And that was the goal from the get-go. It was about safety and efficiencies, not about the actual money. Now, of course, that didn't mean that the pocketbook was wide open and we could go crazy. We had to pretty much hold to the lines that we had already, but that was how it happened. So it was really a case of them coming to us, and we, and I'm one of the few remaining souls that was there at the very beginning of the effort of the 8 chiefs. We had specific things that we wanted to have addressed, and it would never have moved forward without those things being addressed.
All right, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Pozniak?
Pozniak.
Pozniak, I'm sorry. Question, you mentioned, we went to the state and asked for a dispatch or a rec. Somehow we got Tewksbury, but Groton, which is right next door, has a regional dispatch center. Right now they have 2 towns. Would our funding from the state have been any less or more if we had joined Groton or Tewksbury?
I don't think I have really looked at if Pepperell was part of Groton, Dunstable, what the funding levels would have been. I never ran that projection, was never asked to do that.
Never asked if you to look for the town that's right next door to us rather than the town that's 35 miles away.
Usually those requests come from if there's any interest in Pepperell joining Dunstable and they file some kind of letter with them. Groton would have asked us for that projection, but we never received any requests from Groton to do that type of projection. So I didn't produce any estimate for that.
Okay, then one of my last go.
Your mic is off, Jason.
I have a big mouth, so I apologize. It's on. Is that better? For the equipment that's in the town, so the town responsibility would be any repeaters that we need additionally, any antennas, anything that connects to our dispatch center, correct? So if we need a new repeater, because on this side of town, our radios are horrible. We can't, out of our apparatus and our portable radios, you can't talk from this side of town clearly now to our dispatch center. If we needed a new antenna or a new repeater installed in town, who would be responsible for that funding?
As a primary PSAP, Pepperell as a primary PSAP?
No, even in the RECC.
The RCC, they could get that funding either through a development grant or their support and incentive grant to pay for that.
So the way that the agreement is read, I read it, it says that the town is responsible for maintenance of all equipment, phone lines, how'd it go exactly? Each participating community shall provide and maintain all necessary telephone lines, radio circuits, frequencies, two-way radios, antenna, and any related and/or necessary equipment required for the operation of the dispatch facility and the respective emergency networks. All such telecommunications, maintenance costs, and expenses for equipment located within the community shall be the responsibility of each representative community.
Jason, are you asking him about maintenance or purchase? Because they're not the same thing.
Both. Who's going to if we need a new antenna and a new...
Just need to make sure your question is
I'm asking for both.
You
both
asked him about
questions.
purchase, so...
For both, maintenance and we need new stuff. Who pays for it?
So as a major part of just to go back history-wise, when we began this process, what we did is we hired out a company originally by the name of RCC to do a feasibility study, and that was, again, promulgated by the 8 police and fire chiefs. RCC missed several deadlines, and the 8 of us basically got together and we said, you know something, we're not going to leave this for another company to come in and tell us what our individual departments in our communities need. So we actually found them to be in breach of the contract. We fired them, and then what we did is we actually individually parceled out what turned out to be probably the best decision that we made and also the worst from a workload standpoint. We started parceling out the individual pieces of it, but one component of that feasibility study was actually a radio study. And as it turned out, we were very lucky that we actually did that, because the radio study found that all 4 communities that are involved in it actually were at end of life for our radio systems. I feel your pain when it comes to the repeaters in certain dead areas in town, and the fact is that one thing that we found is that if our town is about this big, we only had enough coverage to cover basically the size of my hand. And to be quite blunt about it, the game that was played years ago when I was a patrolman is that, well, for some reason or other, we have dead areas here, 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 here. What was happening is that they were just moving the repeater around town. Well, if you move the repeater here, it's going to create a dead area over here, and it didn't actually fix the problem. It just moved it around the town. As part of that, as part of our grant requests to State 911, we have asked, it includes all the radio equipment, it includes towers, it includes repeaters, it includes everything with regards to that. Now, it's my assumption that I think it could be, with regards to the way that is worded, that the maintenance of that equipment, once it's there, then, because whether you whether you have Comptronics or one of the other companies that comes in, those radio shops that basically maintain it moving forward.
So the town can be responsible for that.
Actually, in our case, no. And the reason I say that is because the radio systems were purchased through the development grant. Technically, they belong to the Regional Communication Center. The Regional Communication Center is an entity unto itself. It is not part of any one of the four communities per se. So what happens when you need to replace or fix or something, it comes out of the repair budgets that are built within the Regional Communication Center. So they maintain the radio systems as the Regional Communication Center. So we, the community of Cohasset, are we paying for them? Yes, because we're paying in every year as one of the 4 members of the center. So are we paying for these, and do they increase, some of the costs funnel down to increases for each one of the communities? Yes, but we're not getting, the Cohasset Fire Department or the Cohasset Police Department are not getting individual bills for the repairs that have to be done. And all the upgrades were covered by the development grant. So we have a Class 1 system right now that we didn't have before.
So if we're not responsible for that, for any of the maintenance and replacement of the equipment, why is that in the agreement?
I would think that would be whatever the wording is for the governance of the center once the center is up and running. As I can say, all I can speak to is my center. Right. And the governance documents that run my center, so that's how we handle it.
Our documents, and it's page 7, section C, part 4 and 5. It says that we're basically the community is responsible for it. So it's just going to be an additional cost that we're told that we have these huge savings coming our way from this informational thing we were sent in the mail, but that's a different question. That's for our board more than you guys, which I have some questions for the board too. For the selectmen, in that informational flyer that was sent out.
Before you ask that, let's finish answering one question at a time.
Okay.
So
I'll hear all night.
To that question.
So the Operations Committee has the responsibility for putting in the system, the equipment, that would be the 2 chiefs. Subcommittee to the Operations Committee, of which Dave Steyer serves on, is the Technology Committee. So they would work out those details. And the way I read, looking at the same section, the Operations Committee shall have the responsibility for the effective and orderly operation of the district, including without limitation, communications equipment and systems, maintenance, operations, protocols, so on and so forth. And I think the parts that missing, if you listen to Mr. Posniak earlier, is that many of the RECCs across the state currently have put in for new equipment, upgrades, making sure that comes under the 2 various forms of grants. Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but the district would have the ability to put in for not only the equipment upgrade, but also the maintenance coverage of that, and as a standing issue that would be handled under the contract for the purchase and the maintenance of the equipment.
For the record, can we get it from the board and the town administrator that there'll be no cost to the town of Pepperell for any maintenance of radios, antenna, repeaters, or any additional items? Everything will come from the RECC. Can we get that today on record?
That's It's in the agreement.
Can we get that on record that there's going to be no additional cost to the town? Can you say that?
I can say that to you.
Say it.
Yeah, I did.
All right. My next question, on the flyer that was sent out on, I think it was the 31st, it was dated. For fiscal year 2018, you have a capital request of $168,011 from the Communications Center, correct?
You're correct.
You carry that same capital request over fiscal year 19 and 20.
You're correct.
Capital requests are a one-time expenditure. Historically, we don't carry it for 3 years. We carry it for the year we spend the money.
So if you look at that same flyer,
Yep.
And I helped draft this,
I know.
so that you can note that for the record as well. I got a listing of equipment that is not listed in the capital request of the 16411. That's $130,000 for a console and roughly $33,000 for repeaters.
Right,
But
and those
what's
were
not,
on fiscal
let me
year
just finish,
2020
excuse me.
and 21.
Excuse me.
Everyone needs to be respectful. When one person's speaking, please wait. You'll have your turn when the other person's done. It doesn't matter who's speaking.
And I think if you recall, we talked about this in my office when you came by for a discussion about it. So what we have going forward, just to be very clear, okay, is the console was installed in 2001, so that's carried because we haven't been able to fund that at this particular juncture, okay, which is no longer supported for parts or service going forward. The radio equipment repeaters were upgraded in 2007 and are due to be upgraded this year, okay, so that's not included. And the antenna for the public safety, which are on the public safety complex, and I asked David Stairs, and I won't put him on the spot, but if he wants to come forward, we don't even know the condition of them. Nobody's been up on the roof to check them out. Okay, so carrying it forward, it's a generally accepted program to say that we have those costs going into the equation. We haven't fixed them yet.
They're on the capital replacement.
That's right, as a general sense of what we anticipated for general costs for capital.
With keeping that in mind, then, the fire department has a $1 million ladder truck on for 2020. So is that saying that the fire department's current budget right now is, I believe it's $350,000 for the fire department? The fire department's budget on the books is $1.3 million a year? Because that's what you're showing here. You're trying to show that that we have a budget of almost $500,000 for the communication center, and you're carrying that every year. If we're going to replace it or not. If we're going to take that out of the equation, we should be starting with our number of $321,000.
The five-year capital plan is a different document than what we're talking about. This document is reflective of fiscal 2018, which we were not able to fund the $168,011.
Every year we fund it.
We're saying that there are other pieces of equipment that are on the list that are aging and need to be addressed. And that includes the console, was installed in 2001, the Kenwood radio repeaters in 2007, antenna that were put up back in 1988. I'm sure there were people in this room that weren't even born then. The CAD system, we're not even addressing the CAD system, the phone system, and other items that are on the system. I want to thank Frank and his team for the next generation 911 system that just went into place that is operational at this time. So it's generally accepted to carry these other items that haven't been on the capital list that we would be putting forward at some point. They're going to go on the capital list in future years.
And the other thing that's not mentioned in this flyer, unless I missed it, which is possible, there's no cost in there for the, and I'm going to use quotations on the security guard that's going to be manning the dispatch center, or it's 128 hours a week, 16 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 48 hours on the weekends. And on average, a security guard in Massachusetts is $17 an hour. That's $44,000 the first half a year. The communications director's not on there. So these are savings that you're not showing the cost coming out of anything.
The communication director, am I not on? The communication director is actually factored into the savings already, and I imagine that the employees who work for Chief Scott would be offended if you called them a security guard, because it would be a police officer who would be on staff. We are understaffed right now in the police department. The goal will be to get us up closer to being fully staffed.
So we're going to have a police officer sitting in the police station for basically 24 hours a day, not leaving the station. That's what we're going to have? We're going to pay a police...
station, and maybe if I can ask to get the wise expertise of the two chiefs, how they handled their FOIAs or how that might have been handled at their particular police stations in their districts. Coverage in the evening.
What I would tell you is that one of the things, one of the programs that was put into place at one point was to build out the Cohasset Police Station, because the fire departments always went dark anyway. The moment that everybody rolled out, you just closed the doors behind you. The police stations never, they were staffed, and that's where the dispatch points were, so there was always somebody in the building. When they moved everybody over, they chose to, all four departments chose to keep someone in the building. Now, during the daytime hours, a lot of times it's a administrative assistant who handles the business calls and the front window. After 4 o'clock at night, the station is staffed, the police station is staffed with police personnel. But what they did do is they spent the money to build an alarm system and to harden the building so that they could lock it and go out the door. So at midnight, when they only run with 3 people on the road, one person is in the, or I should say with 3 people, there are 2 people on the road and 1 person in the station. They have the ability to lock the station and put that 3rd person out on the road if need be. Major accident, whatever the case may be.
And that's a good idea, but the way we were sold is that there's going to be somebody in that building 24/7. That's what was told, that you're going to have somebody manning that station. So we're going to have a police officer sitting in the office all
I
day.
expect that the management of the building will be governed by the chief of police, and ultimately there will be a plan put in place to make sure that we can do what we need to do, have the staffing, man the building, but be able to handle the calls. But that is something that the chief would put together, because again, he's the expert in that field for his building and his staffing and his personnel and their schedules.
Where's that? What's the police officer?
We haven't written that yet. It's part of the savings that we have for the RACC. That's where the savings are going to go.
Reallocation of those savings.
If I could, that was actually a rather large bone of contention with my now former town manager and I about the fact that he wanted a dark station, and we had a philosophical difference over the fact that I thought that right now we're in the process of building a $25 million police and fire station, and he wanted to guard it with a camera, which I thought was inappropriate. I was on the budget subcommittee for the REC, and what we did is that when you look at the composition of all 4 police departments, each one is slightly different. For instance, the town of Norton already has a desk officer, which meant that their dispatcher was going to be going to the REC, and their desk officer was going to maintain the position within that. Again, it all came back to those same 2 tenets of local control and accountability. It's up to the police chief, in my opinion, very asserted opinion, it's up to the police chief to decide whether or not there should be somebody within the station and who comprises that position primarily. So, for instance, there are collective bargaining issues that some departments are going to be dealing with that others are not going to be dealing with. Like, for instance, in Mansfield, we have our window is manned primarily, almost exclusively by civilian dispatchers. But when you go to some of the other communities, they have police officers that sometimes man those windows, which means now if you're going to take, it's labor law 101, is if you're going to take bargaining unit work and you're going to push it to non-bargaining unit members, it becomes a mandatory subject of negotiation, which means now you need to impact bargain that with those various units. The way that we decided to solve that with regards to the budget subcommittee is that we decided to carve out, and this was specific to our area, we decided to carve out about a $300,000 chunk for each community. How each community utilized that funding to man their front window was completely up to that community. But how they did so was going to be dictated primarily by various collective bargaining contracts, local decisions, whether or not there was philosophical opinions, and so on and so forth. So it unfortunately, what it comes down to is with us, it was we tried to just be as creative as we possibly could and say, look, here's a chunk of cash. do with it as you will, but here's a chunk of cash. So myself, Brian Clark, Bill Baker, Gary Sullivan, each knew that we had $300K coming to us, that we can say, all right, now how am I going to take this money and apply it? Now, if it's desk clerks, if it's more police officers, if it's permanent intermittents, if it's reserve officers, you're limited effectively by your town charter. You're effectively limited by your collective bargaining agreements. So it was finding a way that worked within the framework of what worked for each individual community. Actually. So that $300,000, we actually, I'll get a little bit descriptive here. My annual dispatch budget is approximately $975,000. Our apportioned piece of the Regional Communication Center is about $550,000. So what we did then is we took $300,000 right off the top, because that was effectively what everybody was going to end up saving regardless, and we rolled it back into it. Because one of the first things that we said at the very beginning of this, and he probably wouldn't appreciate me throwing him under the bus, but I'm going to anyway. The town manager in Foxborough, Bill Keegan, was really good about the fact that he actually said, this is about improving services first. And then if we save a little bit of money, then kudos to us, but it's all in how we use our imagination. But if at the end of the day, our philosophy was, if at the end of the day we're not improving services, if at the end of the day we're not reducing transfers and reducing call response times, then it's not a worthwhile endeavor.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Chief.
Chief.
Dave Stairs, Pine Street, I'm the Communications Director. I just wanted to clear up some of the capital request questions that Jason had and Mark alluded to. The $168,011 in the first year on the form, or the mailer, that is my capital request for fiscal year 2018. That is for a dispatch console, as well as a, thank you, as well as a radio voter system to clear up dead zones in Pepperell. Mark and I also had a conversation about if the dispatch center stayed open, what future capital needs would we have? And those items are what Mark was alluding to with the radio repeaters and antennas and portable radios and mobile radios. So just to clarify, there is capital needs down the road. They're just not on my capital request as of right now. So, yep.
Thank you very much.
Chief Scott, do you want to speak to Jason's question at all about any plans you might have for the public safety building? Not to put you on the spot.
I'm not sure if you want to know that.
Oh, that feedback is awful.
Yeah, that kind of sticks out. It's got time to put it together.
This is the first I've heard of this, that it's going to be police officers covering the police station. I read the same flyer that everybody else read, and when I saw that it was going to be manned 24/7, I did not know it was going to be by police officers. I assumed for cost savings it would be by a security guard or some type of civilian.
In terms of the plan, ultimately, I think we're too early to have a defined plan. There had been questions raised by members of the public that they were concerned about not having a police officer there. We are open to having a police officer man it. I think at the end of the day, if you chose to do something else, if that's what was come up with as a plan, I think that's fine. If that's what the collective town chooses to do, we are not opposed to having a police officer on staff, increasing your staff so you have more police officers available to make sure that if you have needs in the evening and let's say you did a security guard versus a police officer, they would probably have limited ability to handle if you needed additional call coverage. So again, we are not opposed to that. I would expect that once we get to that point in the planning point, there would be things discussed as part of the budget, as part of the overall planning. But we have no issues with adding an additional police officer to make sure you have more staffing available.
It all comes down to finances. If we can afford police officers, I would prefer to have a police officer in the building.
Hope so.
Still waiting to get my dare officer back and my third officer on midnights, and I'm still down 3 officers from where I was before.
I think the goal of the savings is try to get closer to that. I think that's the whole point, is to put the funds back into public safety. So again, while it's a cost savings, we're not going to stick that back in free cash. As we've said from the very beginning, our goal is to reinvest that into public safety in whatever form is needed based on our public safety needs at that point. I don't think anyone has said we would do otherwise.
I'll work with whatever funding I get. Let's leave it at that.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Toby Tyler. That's David Scott. He forgot to do that, so I just have a few questions. One would be the local backup for our dispatch center. It was mentioned that the fire chief has it, and I'm just curious who paid for that.
Some of the systems were things that we kept, Chief. We also, through emergency management and emergency management performance grants, I forgot to mention that, we also built out, our plan is if we had to evacuate the public safety building, we actually have another dispatch point that's fully equipped and ready to go at our emergency management center, which is, off-site in one of the schools. So we have redundancy on top of redundancy is what's happened. But what we did is we used some of the equipment that when it was replaced, we kept. So it's, antennas on the roofs of the station, that type of stuff. It's limited, but it's still there.
So our stuff or our items that go back to 2001 would probably need to be replaced, and would 911 grant pay for those items, or would the town have to pay for that?
Again, there's two avenues for how you can attack this. One of that is the additional incentive money that the town would be receiving, or the REC receives, and what's in the governance as far as how that money is allocated. The other piece is through development grants, and when you spec out what you're looking for in that development grant, as Chief mentioned earlier, we had a radio engineer come in and go through everything. And he told us what needed to be replaced and what wasn't quite at end of life, and we kind of kept some of our other stuff just because it still worked. We have no plans of replacing it if something happens to it at the moment, but it didn't cost us anything additional, no.
All right, then going from Pepperell all the way to Tewksbury, we have 4 points that they go through microwaves. From Pepperell to Groton to Chelmsford, then to Tewksbury. What is our backup? Do we know that yet, or is it even in,
So, Chief, part of the big gap here that's missing is that you and Chief Scott are on and will be part of the operations committee for your department. So part of the systems, the technology that you need, the equipment that you need, the protocols, the fail-safes will be developed by you in conjunction with the other chiefs and what we need here versus what we also need with the RACC. So that's an active role you take in this particular part of the process in getting us to where we need to be. You actually get to have some say in terms of what you need from an equipment standpoint, what you'd like to see in place for fail-safes, all of that. We are at the very beginning part of this process.
right? And I know nothing about radios except you press the mic and someone should be at the end of it. I'm being flat out honest there. And they are our lifeline, so we need to make sure that they are there. I noticed the chief also said that they had put in the fiber that the 911 paid for. Is that something 911 would pay to run all the way to Pepperell from Tewksbury?
That came through the development grant, so we put in for it. Again, this was us driving the bus. We were the ones that looked at this and said, what do we need to do to build the redundancy in that we wanted? So we came up with the idea of let's connect all the agencies together with that self-healing fiber loop. So we did it through the development grant. And, you know, it's one of those items that is available through the development grant. Now, whether or not, you know, you receive the funding for it is, you know, it's a competitive grant system, so you receive what you receive. But that's how we accomplished it.
Chief, you have to, through the whole process, each town will develop its own equipment list and what they need. Obviously, if we're further away than Draken and Tewksbury are, we have a greater need for that particular kind of equipment, but that's part of what goes on your equipment list when you do putting the plan together. But there are staff in place, directors in place that actually help put these things together as part of the whole process. We have our own executive director. You have the ability to get whatever assessments you need to have done to determine what we need here, similar to what they did in Mansfield from a radio assessment or other. That's part of the process that we can take advantage of to get the equipment that we need to do what we need to do.
If I could, just very quickly, one of the things that we actually addressed within the context of budgeting for the rec moving forward is that we're in the exact same boat as you. Like, we're end users, basically. Like, I press the button, sometimes people hear it, sometimes people don't, and it's incredibly frustrating because our town is not unlike anybody else's, where the fact that we're very understaffed when it comes to MIS or IT needs, which means that when we have a problem, we've got to call out to a radio house, the Radio Shack. They've got to come out, they've got to take a look at it, it's time, so on and so forth. But one of the things that we budgeted for is a full-time IT specialist that will actually work with the communication center, that will actually be available for all of our radio technology needs with relation to anything that's connected to the rec as well. Just a suggestion, because we had the exact same frustrations where we just basically, you know, well, some people are using this radio, some people are using this radio. Well, what's the difference? I don't know. Like at the very beginning of it, we were like, what the heck is microwave? Like, we have no idea. So it was just something that we tried our best to try and find a solution within the context of this to an already existing problem.
So your assessment, your town paid for? Is that how I understand that?
So that original study was actually paid for through a grant through State 911 that I believe I applied for that in 2013 originally.
Chief, you go ahead.
We're not looking for you to be an expert on technology and things like that, because that's not what you're supposed to be, okay? But what we're looking for our department heads to be able to do is to get together and look at other outside agencies that are experts in those areas that can help you figure out what are our needs. We're looking for your group to come together and say, here's our challenges. We have holes in our communications network today. We need to fix those. So how can we fix those? We have to have redundancy so that if something goes down, we have a backup automatically that works. So thinking through all that. Luckily, there's been others who have gone through this, so we can go back and look exactly what they have done and what they have experienced as, you know, difficulties in their plan, and hopefully offset those difficulties when we put our plan together. So as the operations side of it, both you and the police chief have the great opportunity to say, hey, if I had a blank sheet of paper and was building a new system today, what are the things I'd like for it to do and to solve that I can't do today? It's a wonderful opportunity for you.
But I think we're a little different than the two gentlemen that are here. Their towns all connect to one another, where our town, Pepperell, is 5 towns away from Tewksbury, where the regional center is.
I think, Chief Silver, correct me if I'm wrong, you have 8 towns, right? In your,
We have 4.
you have 4. 8 agencies, okay. And Chief Salon, how many are in yours? Are you 4 as well?
Yep, we're also 4.
Okay. Director Pozniak, I know that you have worked with a number of other agencies that have towns that have a similar distance. How are they handling those challenges?
Well, again, these are all eligible expenses under the development grant or the support incentive grant, but primarily because of the cost of those radio items. They're usually put through the development grant. And as the chief mentioned, it is a competitive grant. Not everybody gets everything they ask for, but we ask applicants to prioritize what they need, and we take it from there. But they are eligible expenses, and it doesn't only pertain to contiguous towns. It can be towns that are separated, because we have many of those situations, and they're all eligible expenses that you can apply for. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more money if they're have a little bit more distance to run the fiber, but it is still an eligible expense that you can apply for.
Phil 1009 Chestnut Street. One of the questions that's buzzing around a lot of people's minds, Tewksbury and Drake, 35 to 45 minutes away. We had a fire down the street from here in the house. Fortunately, we were able to get Hollis, Nashua, Groton, Dunstable, Townsend. They all came and running. Shut down the road here. We still lost the house. Now we got to call Drake and Tewksbury.
Phil, I asked that question earlier. The mutual aid component doesn't change. We still have that option and the mutual aid available to us. It may require a certain technological addition to make sure we have what we need, but that was one of the questions that I asked, that mutual aid is a very big part of our community. It's a very important part of our community, and because we are not contiguous to Tewksbury and Drake, it's an item that we have to make sure that is met. That was asked. That part continues. It all depends on where it originates from. If it's originating from us, then what it was either the chief or the director said, we have the ability to program in for our needs, that if we have a certain level event that's going to require vehicles or other from outside our town, that is part of what we plan into our process, and that gets built into the coding for that level of an event, so that those other agencies get notified at the same time that we get notified. That's part of what the chief's plan.
That's why the people are confused. My house is on fire. Who do I call?
911.
I'm going to call 911. Where's that call going to go?
Depends on the phone you use. If you use a landline, it's going to go to the Regional Communication Center. If you use a cell phone, it's going to go to wherever that cell phone is directed, which is not going to be Pepperell. Even now, it doesn't go here. It goes to a state-run facility for cell phone calls. Most people in town don't have then it gets routed however it gets routed, but that's what we have right now.
How long is it going to take?
It takes longer right now. Most people have cell phones today. They don't have landlines. The goal with the regional center is to be able to take over the coverage of cell phones to shorten it down.
We're online and everything's running. It goes to Tewksbury. Where does it go from there?
It comes here. If it's an actual call that goes into Tewksbury and it's for Pepperell,
thing's working right,
it comes here.
Okay, it's working right.
It's a tough act to follow. My name is Jim Duggan. I'm the town manager in Drake. Madam Chair, members of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Posniak, chiefs, Mr. Administrator, thank you very much. I've heard a lot of the exact same concerns expressed in other areas. I've been the town manager in Drake for a little over 3 years. Prior to that, I was in a community that was also exploring being part of the Middleton Regional Dispatch. A lot of the same concerns I heard. I toured 2 facilities, one in Devon's, Mass., a smaller, more intimate regional dispatch, and then another one I went to actually Lackawanna, Pennsylvania. And it was a very, very sophisticated, high-end, high-tech environment, which was very, very good. Ultimately, being the town manager responsible for the community, the cost savings was not a concern of mine. I was even willing to make strategic investments into more advanced technology, better training, consistent, because as we all know, public safety communications and dispatch has gotten very, very sophisticated. As was mentioned earlier, I believe by one of the chiefs, it is a career with many people. And we are providing, I honestly, in the bottom of my heart, and I would not do it unless I felt this way, we are providing our community with better training, consistent training across the board, the updated technology. And if I can just, help your two chiefs here, my chiefs are in support of it, Tewksbury chiefs are in support of it. The idea is to work collaboratively, have the 6 of them get together and be together and absolutely say, okay, what are the needs currently? And what are going to be the needs for the RECC? And that process is going to start as in the very, very near future. That will be part of a grant application that we're going to be submitting. We also have the updating of the systems that is going to be consistent in the maintenance of those systems. One of the biggest concerns, and I believe the select woman at the end had said, people being familiar with the community, and that's not a unique concern. I grew up in Lowell. I understand that there were certain, only areas within Lowell that only Lowellians knew. But because of the technology that we have, because of the training, the transition that is going to be imposed in certain places, that will be eliminated. Not decreased. I honestly feel it will be eliminated. And I think you're going in the right way in regards to making the decision to invest in this. Town of Drake is going to get recognize approximately $200,000 in cost savings from this. That's just with our 2 communities. Those numbers are going to be recalculated with hopefully Pepperell coming in. What I have given my commitment to my public safety chiefs, I'm reinvesting that back into your departments. You as the experts of those departments, I want you to be able to prioritize where you're going to reinvest that. We also need new boots on the ground. We also need individuals. The question that's coming up about, are people going to be is when someone walks into the police station at 3 o'clock in the morning, who's going to be there? So that, as Madam Chair, that is going to be a priority, as you had pointed out. That is going to evolve through the discussions, through the meetings with all the chiefs. I urge you to continue to support this, and I'm available for any questions or anything. Anything that I can help out with. Thank you.
Bill Geekus, Lawrence Street.
I was waiting for you to come up.
I didn't want to interrupt anybody. Good evening, everybody. I had a couple of questions. The first one was where Phil talked about if you called from a landline. Where does the call go now if you call 911 for a landline?
Can't tell if I'm on. If you call from a landline, it should go to Pepperell. Yeah.
In other words, you'd be eliminating that right now, would be going to Tewksbury instead of coming to Pepperell right now. So it would be going 35 miles away first. The other question is, when there's situations, if we have a regional emergency, like we did a few years ago with the ice storm, every time that there's an incident, there's considered a command post. Am I correct about that? I'm not sure because I'm a pizza man. I'm not a fireman or a policeman. But there's a command post set up, correct? Every time that can somebody answer me that? If there's an accident, there's a command post, considered a command post? All right. So Tewksbury being, 4 times the size of Pepperell, has a major highway going through it, 2 major highways, I think, 93 and 495, or if I don't know if 93 is actually part of that. But it's right there by Dascom. So Drake, it's also bigger than Pepperell. So let's say we have a regional emergency like we had the ice storm a few years back. You've got a couple of car accidents on 495. You've got a couple of car accidents in Tewksbury, a couple of car accidents in Drake. You have something happening in Pepperell. You got 10 command posts, which isn't unheard of in Tewksbury, right? You got 4 in Drake. You got 2 in Pepperell. Where does Pepperell fall in the pecking order? If somebody calls 911 and there's other people coming in calling in from 911 where they have more command posts, are we going to be told to stand by? Can somebody answer that one for me? Because, I mean, that's kind of scary. If, somebody's having a heart attack, there's a major car accident, 2 major car accidents, and somebody's having a heart attack and they're told to stand by for something, those seconds make, his life and death.
All I can speak to is how we handled things when we moved. And what I would try and get across to everybody is very simply, what we did was we picked up our dispatch center and moved it. It wouldn't have mattered if we moved it a mile down the road, 10 miles down the road, or whatever down the road, because we expected we would get exactly the same services we were getting before, or enhanced services, which is what we had hoped for. As far as when you have those surges, when all of a sudden you have multiple incidents that happen at the same time across the entire platform, we are better equipped today with my center than we ever were in the past. Because as I mentioned, a lot of times at my center, there would only be one person there that was trying to handle everything. So now...
I wasn't here at the beginning of the meeting. I had so I don't know where you're from, sir.
I'm the Cohasset Fire Chief, so I'm part of the South Shore Regional Communications Center. So there are 4 communities there, and as I said, in the town of Cohasset, a lot of the time, there would only be one dispatcher in the building. Some of the times there were 2, but a lot of times there was 1. Now, during the daytime in Hingham, where the regional center sits, there are 5 people doing dispatch duties. There are also administrative staff that have the ability to also add to that. So we have the ability to light up 7 dispatch positions all at the same time through the regional center that we never had that ability before.
If I could, Ronnie Sullivan, the police chief down in Mansfield, Mass. So we, just like Tewksbury, we actually were at the intersection of 495 and 95, just quite a bit ways down the road. One of the items that we went through as we went through the feasibility study was we took a look at and we took stock of what our dispatchers were doing, and what we ended up finding actually was that for lack of a better way of putting it, our dispatchers ended up becoming a dumping ground for ancillary duties within the police department. And what we found is that what our dispatchers were doing, in addition to emergency communications, 911 taking, so on and so forth, was also all these other duties. So what we did is we overlapped all of the jobs, and we decided that what we're going to do is we narrowly decided exactly what their tasks and duties are going to be. And they are only going to entail communications, dispatching, 911. And then we took all the other ancillary duties and we set them aside. And as I said earlier, with regards to how you're going to solve the front desk issue, as it being specific to each individual community, that was also, as is the ancillary duties and those administrative tasks, are individual to each community. So how each community handled that portion of it was aside themselves. So what we did, though, is that we tried our best to narrow the scope of what those dispatchers are going to be responsible for doing, and we also, by creating a larger center, in theory, now what we have is we have a scalable center for an emergency situation. So, for instance, if we actually use this example a couple of times, in the event that we end up with a nor'easter or a snowstorm, we can actually add more personnel, and we actually have 911 consoles that are in there for them to sit at, so that they can take those additional calls, versus the current situation that I find myself with, which is that I have 2 consoles. I can't go more than that. I can't go, it's only 2. So if I get 3 911 calls that come in simultaneously, as is often the case, I mean, whenever we get a crash someplace, what ends up happening, you end up with 5 or 6 people calling 911. So what ends up happening, though, is that those 2 people get very quickly overwhelmed. Well, what happens now is that with more people available, and we can add more staffing, just like with any other, just like with our the cops on the road. If we can expect a tough night, then we're going to scale up the number of people that are going to be working versus a Sunday midnight shift.
It's not the same people calling. It's not the people calling for the same incident. Let's say you have. You're in Mansfield, you said, sir?
Yes.
Okay, you got a problem down at Xfinity Center, all right? You have 2 fights break out, a car accident, all right? Down the street at another place, you have a house fire. The next town over in Hingham, well, if you don't mind me, all due respect, I don't mind, no offense, but I don't care what goes on in Hingham and Mansfield. If it happens here in Pepperell, Okay, what I'm asking is, and I'm asking the Board of Selectmen, I'm asking the town administrator, I'm also asking you, where do we fall in the pecking order? My question still wasn't answered. Is if there's like 10 command posts in one place, all right, in Tewksbury, 7 in Dracut, and 3 going on in Pepperell, will we be told to stand by, or is it going to be taken care of as if we were calling the police station now?
Bill, what time did you come in terms of the speaking process? When did you come in? Who was speaking when you walked in?
When Jason Russell was speaking.
Okay, so there were some things that were asked earlier on. So just to give you some background, and I'm going to answer your question, Chief Salon, who was just speaking, is going through this process now. He's in a position where they're in the new part of the regionalization process, and Chief Sylvia has been in a regional center for, about 5 years or so. So one of the things that we had asked earlier, and it went to the heart of this question, is that because we're in a startup, our chiefs actually get to sit on operational boards with the other chiefs from the other town. They develop the policies and procedures for the daily operations. That's part of what they get to develop. So we have a say in how that actually occurs. One vote, one town. So Chief Scott gets 1 vote, the chief from Dracut gets 1 vote, the chief from Tewksbury gets 1 vote. Same for the fire department. There are 3 chiefs for each police and fire. They have a subcommittee that they each sit on. Police is over here, fire's over here, and they get to develop their operational protocols and procedures, so they're not going to be the same center to center.
If Chief Scott agrees with, let's say, the Tewksbury chief, and the Dracut chief doesn't agree, it goes that way then, right?
I would assume that based on everything, yes, it's 1 vote, 1 town.
Sure.
But from what we've gotten from the chiefs here, that they all had similar concerns to what we have, that our concerns are not unique in the general sense of the concerns when you regionalize, and that they found when the chiefs actually got together versus the money people, the chiefs actually got together, their concerns were very similar, and they worked very well collaboratively to make sure that they were able to meet all the needs of the towns. I have no reason to believe, based on what I've seen so far, that our chiefs can't do that with the chiefs from the other towns.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. Crystal Jeffries, Heald Street. The gentleman who just went, I'm understanding his question a little different. What I think is being asked is, thank you, how the calls are being handled at the rec center in Tewksbury.
There was no communication. I understand what his question was, because Bill and I talked about his question earlier today. Our police chiefs and fire chiefs with the chiefs for the other towns actually set the operational policies and procedures for how the calls are handled, priorities and otherwise. They actually get to set. Because we're going in on the ground level and there isn't an existing center in place with policies and procedures in place, we actually get to build those policies and procedures. I know exactly what he's asking. I was answering his question.
Oh, I wasn't saying that you weren't. I just understood. I understood the question differently. So I think I need clarification. At the rec center in Tewksbury, how many dispatchers will there be there?
There will be, I think right now we're slated to have, around 7?
5 on duty.
Is that Jim? Who just said 5? Is it 5? Okay, and is that on duty? And then do we know yet what's slated for the evening hours? Is it 5? So it's 5 pretty much evening and day. Okay.
24/7 at the rec center in Tewksbury answering calls.
Now.
Right, I understand that. So when they have an influx of calls, the 5 dispatchers working at the center in Tewksbury, and you have 10 calls coming in, how are those calls handled by them? Is it technology that's answering the calls? Is it...
The short answer is today we don't know because it hasn't been built.
Okay, understood.
And that's
Thank you.
the thing we need to do with the operations committee is to build the system to go through all these scenarios to make sure that
So it's new for Tewksbury as well?
What's that?
It's also new for Tewksbury?
It's a brand
So no one has
spanking
asked
nothing.
these questions before we decided to move forward?
There's no...
Okay. Understood.
No.
I have a question for the chief. My apologies, I came in late also, so I don't know your name, sir.
Robert Sylvia.
Okay. You mentioned redundancies as being very important in backup plans, you know, if calls were dropped or what have you. And you said most of those redundancies are, like, for instance, the fiber optic loop. Those are put in place with development grants?
Correct.
Okay. The development grants, are those applied for after you already joined the regional center, or is that something you do beforehand?
Well, yes.
I'm just a member of the public.
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
Because I don't know how it works.
It's a good question.
Thank you.
Well, right now, the project had, and it's not in operation, but they do have a development grant in for a significant amount of money. So that is allowed, that you can do that as long as, to get equipment or construction money, you have to have a signed intermunicipal agreement, which they do. If you don't have a signed agreement, there's other items you can apply for, like professional services or project management, but that can all happen before you become operational.
But once you become part of the regional center, you can continue to apply for development grants.
That's correct. That's the beauty of the development grant, in my view,
Okay.
is that it's not only covering those capital needs for the startup, but as an existing rec, you can apply each year. It's in our priority too. But in that manner, that existing rec can continue to operate a state-of-the-art facility with those enhancements.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And are those development grants, how are they determined? Are they a sure thing, or how are those determined if a town will get a development grant for a specific project or need?
Well, the way it works is it's by statute a development grant, so we have to fund it. And it started in fiscal year 2009, and it's been running since then. And we generally run it at, the pot of money is $8 million. This year we increased it to $12 million. And it is a competitive grant. And this year, you know, we had quite a few applications. There's interest. And what we do is we go through each of the applicants, each of the applications, and you know, we try to fund as much as we can. We ask the applicants to prioritize what they need, and we try to give them their priority. Priority one is the startups. So they have the first priority because we're trying to get them started up. But we generally have enough money to fund some of the projects that the priority two, the existing regionals, request. So that's generally how it's done.
Thank you, sir. And also, I understand the IT specialist was very important for your town, sir. I didn't hear, is that funded by the state or is it not?
So as part of the budget subcommittee, we created not just the business model, but also the organizational structure. And what we did is that's actually going to be paid for as part of all four communities' contributions into it. It basically, so it's going to be paid for by the communities that are involved in it, but it was just a matter of restructuring the organization, if that makes sense.
Is that one IT specialist for all of your towns?
It's one IT specialist for the four towns.
I see, okay.
Which is, as of right now, is one more than we have.
I understand. That's excellent clarification. Thank you. Yes.
Cannot tell if this is on. That's part of our process as well, but again, that's something that when the 3 chiefs for fire, 3 chiefs for police, and the 3 town administrators get together, again, we are in the development stage. All of that has to get put together as part of our plan, but technology is part of it.
I understand. For our Board of Selectmen, how much per year do we pay into it as a town? I understand the savings part, but how much are we actually paying out to be part of this?
Right now, it's projected at about $163,000. I believe that was put in the flyer that went out.
That's per year. Thank you. We have the town manager of Drake here. I understand, is there another town manager that I'm not aware of because I came in late?
No. Oh, he's not here.
Okay. My question is, Chelmsford was originally part of your agreement?
No.
They were not?
No. The Board of Selectmen did not.
Okay, correct. All right, thank you. Let me just make sure. Earlier, Mr. Nutter, you asked an excellent question. I need clarification on it because the question was also asked by Mr. Russell, and I'm not sure what the answer is. You asked if we did join Groton versus Tewksbury, would the funding be different? Please correct me on the way the question was asked. I don't remember exactly how you asked it. Can you ask that again, please? I don't want to misquote.
The question was the pros and cons between an existing facility versus a new RECC facility. That was the question. What are the pros and cons between the two?
There was also a question about funding.
Well, that
state
came up
funding.
as part of that was funding.
Okay. So I understand from the director that it wasn't brought to your attention by the town of Groton because they didn't put in for it for us to be part of their regional center.
The question was that, what was that being asked is, what would be the projection for support and incentive grant funding if Pepperell joined Groton? Because we do get requests to produce that estimate. That's not the development grant. This is a support and incentive grant, which covers operational needs of the regional PSAP. We didn't get a request from Groton to run that estimate, so we did not produce that.
So that's information we didn't have to make this decision moving forward, to join?
It comes from us, it comes from Groton. But at the same time, I'm not, if you weren't here,
I came in 15 minutes
Director
late.
Posniak described the differences between the actual grants themselves, and the support and operations grants relatively small in comparison, that where we get the majority of the grant from is the development grant, which is what funds our equipment. It funds what we need to be in the RECC. So the real question is whether or not we would have qualified for a development grant, which, since Groton's an existing quasi-RECC, then we may not, and Director Posniak I may be able to speak to this, that development piece is what gives us the real benefit. We get that by doing the startup with Tewksbury.
And the real benefit, again, is
We
the
get
equipment part?
updated
or-
equipment, we get updated technology to be able to provide better, more efficient emergency services to our town. That, in essence, is the goal.
Okay. From what I understand, then, if we weren't to go with the development grant route to join Tewksbury, that dispatch center, but instead Groton, and take advantage of the incentive programs that are out there, we would still have those same efficiencies provided to us. It would just be a different program.
Well, again, Groton is a regional PSAP, so they are eligible to apply for funding through the development grant, and in previous years they actually have done that. So that would have been an avenue, but that wasn't the course that was taken. The course that was taken is what's in front of us for the Tewksbury, Drake-It, and Pepperell project. And that's what we have in front of us now in the development grant. So Groton can apply, but they're not in. They didn't apply for anything this year, and that's not what we're here for today.
Correct. I do understand that because we're talking about the regional center in Tewksbury, we're part of that. That's why we're here tonight. But conceivably, we could have worked with Groton to move forward with something similar. But
We would have had to join with them first in order to do that. So in order to submit for those grants, you have to have an agreement. So you don't get to find out what you're going to get first and then join. You have to join, then you find out what you're going to get.
But in this case, we knew what we were getting before we joined.
We knew that we were part of a startup and what benefits would have available to us. There have been studies done and things put in place. Again, with Groton, we would have had to have joined first. Then Groton would have been responsible for submitting the grant application for what we needed.
On our behalf. Thank you.
Bridget Morris, 3 Parker Hill Way. I want to go back to the question that Phil had asked also, because
Just remind us which one he asked a couple.
yeah, I'm just kind of read my notes. All right, in the situation that the regional center has currently right now, when the dispatchers are in the dispatch room, they have all the counties and where all their apparatus is, correct?
I think there's two different things going on here. The county situation was my mutual aid situation, and that's a completely different animal.
That's my question, is for mutual aid.
So for mutual aid, they handle, because we are contiguous, the 4 towns are contiguous, a lot of the mutual aid happens seamlessly because all the dispatchers are in the same room in my situation. Prior to that, we always had the same situation. To get mutual aid, even though they were right next door to us, we had to radio out to or call the county control point, which then provided the mutual aid. So we actually upgraded our mutual aid capabilities when we went to the REC.
Now, because we're so far away from where Tewksbury is going to be, and our mutual aid is not in the same country, the same county, not even the same state, could you explain to me how that would work?
That's strictly about technology, again. Our technology, all the technology is very simply, and this is what I really try to stress, is that all you're doing is picking up that dispatch point and moving it to someplace else. And it doesn't matter if it's 1 mile down the road or 25 miles down the road. It's still that dispatch point. And all the ways that you connect to your mutual aid partners presently, you should keep. And that's what we did. So we were able to keep all our mutual aid contact points and all our radio infrastructure and our paging systems and our phone systems and everything else. So it really, all we did was move the dispatch point from point A to point B.
So, I guess my question would be for the Chief? Scott? No, I'm sorry, Toby. How do we man it now for mutual aid? Is it listening, or do we have it on a board?
That would be Jason. So right now, the way it works is...
Where's the portable one? Can we?
Dave Stairs, Pine Street Communications Director. So right now, we monitor all the surrounding communities. We have the frequencies right in dispatch. If something happens, our dispatcher's on top of it. We have their SOPs as well as ours. So we'll get units going most of the time if there's a big incident. Standard operating procedures. So, and vice versa. If something happens in Pepperell, Hollis, Brookline, Groton, they're all monitoring us. They're getting units rolling quickly, as opposed to having to call for it. They're going to have it ready.
So how would we monitor, or how would Tewksbury, with their 5 dispatchers, monitor our current mutual?
The same way. All those frequencies would be there as well. It would just be, in my opinion, a little bit more difficult to monitor Greater Lowell as well as us, but the same way. They would have all our frequencies, Dracut, Lowell, Pelham, New Hampshire, wherever the bordering communities are, they would monitor all those frequencies as well.
And would that be possible to do with 5 dispatchers, with all the calls coming in to?
That's a good question. It would certainly be more difficult, but you would have 5 dispatchers as opposed to 1 or 2 now. So depending on if it's a mass event, it could be very difficult to handle. Day-to-day events, it wouldn't be hard.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And for the wireless callers, if I'm not mistaken, did I hear that one of your centers now have a 911 wireless direct? So that if I call on my wireless phone, it goes directly to your rec center?
Right now, there's 3 centers that take wireless calls directly. It's Boston, Nantucket, and Duxbury. Their regional center down there is called the Regional Old Colony Communication Center, or ROC for short. But we are running a project right now to try to incent and encourage the PSAPs, particularly the regional PSAPs, to take wireless calls directly. So we're anticipating over the next year to increase that number that are taking the wireless calls directly. And we're also encouraging this group right here, when they go operational on day 1, to take the wireless calls directly. So it is a project that is underway, but currently, to answer your question, there's, like I said, 3 PSAPs that are taking them now: Boston, Nantucket, and the Duxbury Regional, that's called the ROC.
Is that something that we can do when we go to Tewksbury? Because the way I heard it is if we call 911, we go to the state, and then we...
Again, that's what happens right now in terms of the existing structure, because, again, Pepperell doesn't have that capability, and that's not a capability we have the ability to get right now. But part of the process in developing the plans, that's part of at least what we envision in terms of being able to be part of the RECC. But again, the operational component in terms of that policy and procedure is going to be based on the chiefs, fire, police collaborating, as well as the town administrators, town managers collaborating to make sure that we have the ability to service. At the end of the day, most people have cell phones today. A lot of people don't have landlines anymore. And I'm not sure that people realize that when you call 911, even from here in Pepperell, you aren't going to Pepperell right away. You're routing around until eventually you get here. It better serves our community if we have the ability to have the wireless direct. That is something that we envision as being a part of it, but we don't have the control of that. The chiefs and the administrators for the 3 towns do, but we envision that as a part of the whole process, because again, the goal of going to the RECC is not just because we're trying to save money, it's to be able to provide better, more efficient emergency management services for our town.
If I could, we actually discussed that very issue during the course of the evolution of us creating ours, and there were 2 very specific reasons as to why that issue was addressed with us. The first has to do with the call transfers and the response times, as I talked about earlier. It's a lot easier for a cell phone call to go directly to the REC and then get dispatched police and fire directly from there in our area. The second part, and I'm not sure if Mr. Posniak is going to want me to say this out loud, but the other part of it also has to do, it's monetarily driven. Because as of right now, every single time one of you calls a 911, that cell phone call goes to the state police barracks. And that barracks then turns around and they transfer the call from somewhere. But the amount of money that is allocated to that barracks is dictated by the first PSAP that it goes to. So the thought process being is that the grant adjustments, and our theory is the grant adjustments would only go up because of the fact that we would be able to take those calls directly, which means that basically, effectively, the cash incentive ends up coming to the local REC as opposed to going to the state.
So the state gets the credit for the 911 call, not the rec center?
Today.
Okay. And another question I'm kind of confused about was if Chief Toby and Chief Scott can be given a blank piece of paper and build their own center and build what they want, were they asked to do that now? Because I was kind of confused by the questions and the answers from earlier.
Part of building this system gives them the ability to create the dispatch center that they want, or the communication center that they want, because doesn't exist today. It's a plan that we're putting in place. It needs to be, like all plans, has to be developed to say these are the capabilities we want in there. This is the equipment we're going to need. This is the improvement to our system so that we don't have any holes in our communications network. They have that blank sheet of paper in front of them today because of going to a new dispatch center.
But were they given the same opportunity to look at the pros and the cons from the other dispatch centers, such as Devon's and Groton, and have their input?
This is a brand-new facility. The other facilities already exist. So you have to, let's take Groton as an example. You go into what they have as a system, okay? You don't get the opportunity to necessarily build out the same system you'd like to build. You have to marry it to what they're doing.
Then I'm kind of confused, because I'm thinking the way that I'm hearing tonight and what you're saying right now is that choice was taken away from them to have any input in any of the decision?
At all. Part of this process is each chief, again, I'm not sure what time you came in and at what point from speaking. Okay, so each chief gets to sit on a subcommittee that, in essence, since the first grant application was just submitted May 15th, that ball starts rolling very, very soon. But it's going to be on the chiefs from the 3 towns to start communicating with each other to put that together.
I understand that. That's going forward. But I'm saying going past, were they given the opportunity to have some input into whether we went to the regional center in Tewksbury, or whether we didn't and maybe went to Groton or Devon's, or stayed by ourselves?
Ms. Morris, I think I can address that for you. So in September of 2015, well over a year and a half ago, the two chiefs, Chief Scott, Chief Tyler, Director Stairs, myself and former communications director, Frank Quattrocchi, really worked very hard to get out. We got out to Middleton. We looked at the Essex Regional Facility, toured it for a good part of a day. We've all been out to Devon's a couple times, toured it, talked with their director, Nathan Kenny, and their staff. And we went over to Groton, talked with Chief DePalmer, and I talked directly to Manager Haddad. So they were given that charge. I asked that they be given that charge, and to send the information up to the Board of Selectmen, which under Mass General laws, and you've all seen the legal agreement from our town council, that allows the Board of Selectmen under Mass General Law, Chapter 6A, to make the decision to enter into intermunicipal agreements, which was done. So the analysis, I think I worked out with Dave Stairs, and he might be able to speak to this a little bit better, but we had 14, 15 different data points that were assembled and sent, once again, through the process. So we put a worksheet together for each of the centers that we visited, talking to personnel, talking to staff, talking to the directors that run the facilities, and that was well over a year and a half of activity. So I hope that answers your question.
Can you also explain to me what, at the town meeting right around that time, didn't we allocate money to review building a communication center off of Brookline Street?
Part of, in that fiscal year, that was the override year. The override failed. Part of the capital plan that was put in place, had the override passed, there were large components of it that would have dealt with the Emergency Management and Communication Center. But when the override failed, those things weren't able to go forward.
So because the override failed, that's why we're going to go to the REEC?
Is it because the override failed? No, but if the override had passed, we would have had a better financial ability to manage some of these larger capital purchases, to be able to keep ourselves technologically up to date, make sure we could buy our equipment, make sure we could manage our own dead spots in town, have the equipment that we needed here. But that all costs money, and the communication equipment is very expensive. And so to be able to maintain it, it's hard to do that within our existing capital budget structure and the existing operating budget structure we have right now.
So when we join the REEC, all of the equipment structure for the dispatch and the radios is going to come out of the current chief's budget. But you're not going, their officers and everything else, their cars and stuff like that are not going to be affected by it, right?
I want to make sure that I'm understanding your question. So we have the ability through the grants, through the RACC, through the support and incentive grants, the development grants that Director Pozniak has talked about, we have the ability to make sure that we can upgrade whatever infrastructure we need to update in town. That includes cars, other emergency management vehicles within the buildings itself. If we need DPW to be on the same page, communications, we get to make sure that we get our technology up to speed from an emergency management / communication perspective to do what we need to do. But for example, the chief getting another car as part of his needs, the car itself is not part of the RACC, it's not part of communication, but the radio that needs to go into the car is part of the RACC and part of the communication. So it all depends on what the particular item is for. But things that are tied to communication, to make sure that we can communicate with the center, with our cars, with each other, that's the stuff that's part of the RACC and part of the grants that we can apply for.
Okay.
Beverly Woods, I'm the director at Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. One is that we've been studying this project for 7 years. This isn't something that just arose suddenly, and Pepperell Town staff, including the chiefs, were involved in that process the whole way along. The other is, in terms of the number of dispatchers, we have 5 dispatchers. There's also a supervisor who has the capability to dispatch during a major event. And it's part of the staffing program. There is a technology specialist and an executive director. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that we can't expand the capacity of people answering the phone if there's a major incident. And I'll throw this out to the chiefs, but my understanding is, in a situation that was cited where there are 5 dispatchers and 10 calls come in, calls are answered in the order in which they arrive, regardless of the community that they originate from. So it's not like one community will get preference over another. So that's it.
Thank you.
David Lavender, 19 Deerfield Drive. First, I'd just like to ask, you brought up the fact that you formed a committee back in August of 2015. At least according to your minutes from that meeting, it was Mr. Andrews, Chief Scott, Chief Tyler, and Mr. Stairs. Later, you added the former communication director. Now, I'm wondering, committees usually have meetings. Did you have committee meetings, Mr. Andrews? No. He was on the committee, you weren't, so I'll ask him.
First of all, it's the minutes from the September 28, 2015 meeting of the Board of Selectmen. This is a working committee, so I would chat on a regular basis, have discussions with the chiefs, talk with them individually, have our meetings, go out once again to visit these various areas on really an as-needed basis, with the idea towards, as Mrs. Woods has just put forward, that this has been something where we have been at this for quite some time. Right.
It states that the committee was going to develop a plan to regionalize 911 services and bring it back to the Board of Selectmen for final approval. Now, generally, committees have votes. Did your committee ever have a vote and determine that this was the best course of action?
I asked for the committee. It was an ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee's role, just to be very clear, was to collect the information, get those data points collected, go out and visit the facilities that were in kind of consideration, or being considered, I should say, and then put that information forward to the Board of Selectmen. No formal votes were needed by the working committee. The emphasis was, once again, if you would like, I can read the action items that were centered on the board as requested at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, that the plan was to include information on the projects, the feasibility study, implementation plan, and once again, the committee was put together to give that information to the Board of Selectmen, who ultimately makes that call under the Mass General laws.
So you took into consideration the input of the other committee members? Because reading through notes and everything, it appears that 3 of them were against doing this particular course of action. Just wondering. Another question I have, everybody, I'm glad that yours is working. There are situations where the RACCs are not working. Essex County, it's in turmoil. Beverly bailed out before it started. I understand the Topsfield police have had a vote of no confidence. Amesbury, which is a non-contiguous town, is apparently evaluating the possibility of leaving that RACC. And just last week, I saw an article that said, and the news is not always correct, that the Sheriff's Department had to come up with $2.5 million for the budget this year, which is state money, but still it came out of the Sheriff's Department's budget. So it looks from the outside like things are not going that well with that particular RACC. What's the state doing to rectify that, and what will the state do if we encounter similar problems? Thank you. But I would like to know.
Well, with respect to Essex, they do have 5 communities in there, and they also, they're one of our wireless centers as well, that gets funded by us, so they serve an important purpose right now. We are looking at their operating budget and working with them. We give them a significant amount of money in the support and incentive grant, particularly for FY18. You know, like I said, we're looking closely at it, and going forward, we're going to be working closely with them to address the issues that they have there. But they are currently answering for 5 communities. You're right about Beverly. Beverly decided not to join, and they've been involved in litigation about that. But you know, that's 1 out of the 25. And these gentlemen here have, you know, particularly the SHREC has been in operation for 5 years now. The Duxbury that I mentioned, the Duxbury Rec called The Rock, is adding communities. And it's like anything else. I mean, some are well-run and are doing well, and others have bumps in the road, and we have to deal with those issues. So that's the extent of Essex. Did you mention another community, regional?
No, is there one?
There's 25 of them. Not that I'm aware of.
Mr. Posner, if I could, that was, so we were fairly well acquainted, and as I said earlier, we had the benefit of hindsight and looking at what was working and what wasn't working. And I think that when you look at some of these regional communication centers, and quite frankly, any regional coalition, whether it be here in Massachusetts or anywhere else, where you see a breakdown fundamentally actually is when you're lacking that local control and accountability element. And one of the things that we did specifically when it came to the operations manual is that, you know, although we assigned a person from each agency to create the operations manual, that person then delegated to officers and firefighters to create a working group within each agency to build the best practices. And what that also did, though, is it also got an understanding from the end users that are going to be on the other side of the radio call, of what exactly went into training and the operations and the manual and such. I can't speak to what was done or what wasn't done in some of the others, but I can say that if you don't reach out and get the input from the people that are actually going to be the end user of those radio calls, then you're effectively undermining yourself in the long run, and you're basically going to end up you're effectively going to end up setting a time bomb. Because what's going to end up happening is there's going to be communication issues. There's going to be miscommunication, there's going to be misinterpretation, and quite frankly, you know, I think I've spent enough time around cops, so I know that, you know, if you give them enough time, they'll start finding something to complain about. So it's no different from agency to agency, but what you need to do is you've got to get their input as far as that goes. And again, that was done during the operation manual, building that phase of it, and that was done over probably a 6 to 9 month time period. It's not something that happened overnight, and again, it wasn't something that we didn't just take a document and just foist it on everybody and say, here's the new manual, this is going to solve all of our problems. The document was created piece and parcel by officers and firefighters from every single community. I hope that helps, at least moving forward. I mean, like I said, we all learn from mistakes of other people and what we do, and I hope that, you know, if somebody can come up with a better system, by all means.
Before we move on, it's starting to get really late, and we have our guests who've come here, and some of them have very far to travel. I'll take new questions, but I don't want to rehash questions that have already been asked. Do you have a new question? Okay.
Jason Russell, Lowell Road. Melissa, you talked about DPW. Question is our DPW, water, highway, sewer department, are they going to be dispatching through the RECC, or are we going to have a new dispatch system for them?
That's got to be part of the design.
That would be part of the design, because I know they're a very important part of public safety.
Agree with you.
Okay, last thing is just a statement, and from myself and maybe a few others, if I'm speaking for anybody, they can take me out back later. For the police chiefs, for the director of MCOG, the town administrator from Drake, chief from Tewksbury. I want to thank you guys for coming here and giving us this information. Unfortunately, for the town, we really would have liked to have this information before our Board of Selectmen move forward, but that's not you guys, so if you take any anger issues from the town of Pepperell. That's the reason. We're not directing it towards you directly. It's just we're not happy with the way the process worked. So from myself as a town resident, my whole life for the most part, I'd like to thank you guys for coming here and giving us the information tonight. So.
Again, if there are new questions, it's 9:30, and these guys
Not a
have a
question.
very long ways to draft.
Not a question. I want to second that. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. And also, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows about the special town meeting on June 19th. Free cash for the ambulance. Got to vote. Thank you.
Go ahead, John. And then,
Another gentleman standing up.
Phil, did you want to? Okay.
Phil,
No, Phil, there was somebody behind you, so sorry, he stood up first. Okay.
I just want to straighten out one point. I was at the Selectmen's meeting the night this whole thing came to order, when the chief of police, the chief of the fire department, 2 officers, and the communications chief was there. Shut up. You guys straighten this thing out. The chief of police, the fire chief, and the communications officer, and the gentleman in the middle of that table worked tirelessly for many months, actually, checking into this whole thing. And a few other people along with them. This gentleman here was one of them. A lot of people didn't like it, didn't go along with it. And in the final minutes of the evening, the chief himself, police chief, and even the fire chief, and even the communications officer were confused and didn't really know what they wanted. But the chief and the selectmen, who happened to be that guy right there, not Lisa, they voted on it. And that's the reason why we have a problem today. The people, some of them here, a lot of them in town, were upset because they didn't get the opportunity to have a discussion about it. They didn't have the opportunity to vote on it. It was voted on and done, and it is done. They got a contract.
Can we get out of it? June 19th.
So it's over. They got a contract. The charter says so. So I don't see why we're spending all this time discussing it. You did a good job. We're going to have a communication center. We're going to save money. Let's do it.
Go, can you let the chief just let him come up real quick. Chief, go ahead, come up. You threw me off. You were over there, and then you came over here.
Madam Chairman, if you don't mind, can I just relocate over there so I'm not talking to the backs here?
That's why we moved them up here, so they wouldn't have the back there.
Sorry. I just don't like having my back to people when I talk. My name is Michael Hayes. I'm the fire chief, town of Tewksbury. Work closely with Chief Tyler. We're both on the District 6. We're both in Fire District 6. That fire district runs from North Reading all the way over here to Pepperell, Tingsboro, Andover. It's a pretty big district. Just a few of the communication issues. If Pepperell, Chief Tyler, how many dispatchers do you have right now? If you had an emergency, how many people would be answering the phone, answering the radio?
One or two, then we bring additional dispatchers in.
Okay, so right now, if somebody made a phone call in Pepperell, had an emergency, it's generally one person that's going to be answering the phone and then sending out your equipment. And when you get overwhelmed, what happens?
We come in to help.
Okay, you come in to help. In the statewide plan and in the fire districts, we have district centers. Ours is in Westford. So it happens in Tewksbury. We have 2 dispatchers on 24/7. There are times we have a very robust ambulance service. Drakeit does not have an ambulance service, but they do have ambulance service through a private agency. We have in the fire department our ambulance service, so it is very busy. There are times that when those calls come in and where is the emergency, where am I getting bumped in the pecking order, it's all based on priorities. That's where it goes. The choking baby comes first, the car accident comes second, the person that needs a ride to the doctor's office comes a distant third. So those calls are always prioritized, all right? So it doesn't matter in a regional center where the call comes in, it gets put in and you'll hear the dispatchers on a regular basis say, is this an emergency? Yes or no, please hold. And they'll get back to you when they get back to you, okay? So where we are right now in Pepperell, and I can kind of see where the chiefs are upset on this, where maybe not part in the forefront, in their opinion, their mind, of the decision on going to the Tewksbury Center. We want to have a working cooperative relationship. On Thursday, we met with the architect. We're negotiating out a deal with that architect, and we are also bringing in a third-party communication expert. That person is going to come in, just like Chief Tyler. I know something about communication systems, but basically, click the mic, talk, somebody answers, hopefully. We're going to have that communications expert come in, all 3 communities, figure out from that expert, not just us collectively will have input on that from the public safety chiefs, but that expert's going to tell us what the best communication methods and what redundancies should be worked into the systems to get our three communities working together if all 3 communities do wind up going down this endeavor. We're looking sometime opening January 2019-ish is what we're looking at for the station, for the communication center to be up and running. When we train dispatchers, it's Tewksbury Redmond. That's the big thing about the logos. So Tewksbury is how we pronounce it. The dialects aren't going to be that much different between Pepperell and Tewksbury and Dracut. All right, it's not too far off. But what we do is, and I'm sure you do it in your communities also, is the dispatchers do ride-alongs. They have to go to the police department, they have to go to the fire department, they actually go out in the communities and ride on the apparatus and in the cruises in the communities, and they have to have ride-alongs so that they get a feeling for when they push the button and they tone somebody out, they know what they're toning out, and in a lot of cases, they know who they're toning out at that point. Same thing's going to happen here. A lot of our dispatchers do not come from Tewksbury. They don't live in Tewksbury, but they know Tewksbury very well through the training process of going through and learning that. In the CAD systems, and that's something the 6 chiefs met a few weeks ago. We came together, we met, and one of the first things we said when we were talking about how we were going to communicate, right now you can, Chief Tyler can get in his car and drive to California in just a matter of radio frequencies that's already in his car right now, can talk all the way to California with the matter of communication and flipping switches all the way across the country. So that's a national system that's set up in the first place. So the communications is very robust. It's going to be in our center and very redundant. As far as one of our chief concerns was, how do we get all of our, for the dispatchers, CAD systems? What CAD system are we going to use? How are we going to say what fire reporting system we're going to use, what police reporting systems we're going to use? By Pepperell coming in and taking that blank white piece of paper right now, we can all come together and design the best system for all 3 communities, doing it together now. So I guess the only thing I can say is that we're committed to the community of Pepperell, community of Dracut, and the community of Tewksbury coming together to put together the best plan possible so that we have the best practices in place and don't make the mistakes that some other regional centers have made. That's what we're looking to do here, and I hope that the community can move forward and enter into that endeavor with us coming in the future. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming out.
John, go ahead, and I'm going to have you be the last person, and then we're going to close the meeting out, okay?
John Laddick, 16 Jones Street. Two real basic questions. One is, where does the money that goes into the grants come from? Is it my tax money or something else?
It's a 911 surcharge on everybody's telephone bill. You would see it, I think it says E901 surcharge / disability access program. It's $1. That funds all the grant programs. It funds my entire agency. Salaries, any program we run comes out of that. We're not part of the state budget.
How much money do you have in the account right now?
In the development grant?
Yes.
I can't really say much because of these guys here. Well, at $1, we generate close to $106 million in revenue.
How come you sort of only dole out $12 million at a year?
Say it again? I didn't hear it.
You said you only have like $12 million to give out this year. Why is it such a small amount?
Well, we look at our budget and we look at the different programs that we run. And actually, I mentioned a little bit during my presentation, is we're putting in a new 911 system, next generation 911. So we're overhauling the entire system in the state. So that's a pretty expensive price tag. So a lot of the funding is going towards that. And it goes towards the other programs. And that pretty much covers it. With a little bit of a surplus.
Okay, thanks. These two probably directed at the chiefs. One of the discussions is this system is going to help at least keep everything the same in terms of efficiencies, if not improve it. How do you measure efficiencies? Who records it? Who manages it? Who reports it? How will we know that we're doing as good, if not better?
So that's an excellent question. That was one of the questions that was asked during our feasibility study. And one of the ways, so it's kind of funny. We've actually been asking this question for a number of years, and which is, what is the best way to measure proficiency in public safety? And one of the measurements that we came up with is response times. And by shortening the number of transfers, we were able to improve our response times. So in Mansfield, we're building a new public safety facility. And one of the rationale for where exactly we are placing the public safety facility is because we were able to take at certain points in our town, a 7-minute response time for the fire department, which if I'm not mistaken, is almost double what the national average, what you're supposed to have. And we were able to reduce that to 4 minutes or less to any area in the community because of the fact that we were able to space out the fire stations as well. So when you talk about whether or not we're going to improve services, one of the key things to consider is your ability to deliver services in a quick and efficient manner. And that is, let's face it, 2 years ago, when my mother collapsed in her driveway, I wanted the cop there as soon as possible. I wanted the ambulance there as soon as possible. And we all do. And we all understand what it's like to, when you're standing there and you're giving CPR for 30 seconds to a minute, it definitely does not feel like 1 minute. So it's all about getting them there as soon as possible with the AED, the oxygen, and all the other equipment, and the advanced life support, and so on and so forth. So when you talk about whether or not you can improve services, one of the things to consider, and one of the things that we considered, was we took a look at our response times now from the time that we take a 911 call. And one of the things is, again, not to reiterate the point, but when you call 911 now, it goes to the state police. The state police then transfer it somewhere else, and then depending upon how your jurisdiction or how your town sets it up, you could end up being transferred more than once again within that community. The ultimate goal, as far as I saw it, as far as the fire chief and the other 6 police and fire chiefs saw it in our area, the ultimate goal is to, when you pick up the phone and you dial 911, because just like the person said, more and more people, nobody's really using a house phone anymore. And when you dial 911 on your cell phone, it goes directly to the RECC, which then immediately dispatches services from there, which cuts out very precious seconds and moments. So That's a very long-winded response to your question, but that would be one measurement of keeping an eye on whether or not it's a success or whether or not it's something, a worthwhile endeavor.
The only thing I would add to that, because obviously it is about response time, but within the REC itself, we charge and as far as our facility goes, we charge the executive director with doing QA and QI, so quality improvement, quality control, quality assessment. And through the systems that are in-house, they can measure how quickly the calls are answered, how quickly they're handled from the point of 911, what is your emergency, right to when is the button pushed for the call to go out either via radio or toned out or whatever the case may be. So we track that stuff constantly, and then they randomly just pull calls. And when they pull a call, they actually listen to the call, and they critique it. And then they critique it with the dispatchers. So there is a program in-house to measure all of that stuff, and we track it. And that's how we know that we're providing a better product than we once were.
Is that reported to the chiefs?
Yes.
Okay.
As far as that goes, though, and if you ask anybody, if you ask my town manager, I'm prone to saying things out loud that I should probably keep to myself. But along those lines, one of the issues that we had, too, is that if I had any hair, I would have already pulled it all out with regards to the fact that we aren't doing a lot of that stuff, and it's state mandated. And when you start looking at all the other communities in our area, we were all in the same boat. It's a matter of, at this point, with the amount of work that's on everybody's tables, the cup runneth over, which means that we just don't have anybody to do it. So with regionalization, it also affords us the opportunity of having a bigger organization with somebody that we can assign to those tasks to ensure quality control.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I just want to thank everybody who came out from the community. I especially want to thank the individuals who came from far away in some cases to help answer questions today. Thank you guys so much for being here. It was really, really helpful and informative to see all aspects of it, one from the state level, but also someone who's in an RECC already, but someone who's a little further ahead in the game than we are here. So I sincerely thank everybody who came tonight, and have a great night. Do we need a motion to adjourn? Yes. So I need a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, it's unanimous. We're done.
Good.